Alrighty. Recording? Recording? It's recording. Good. Okay, so I've got some background footage here really quick, and I wanted to tack this video on to a write-up that I made about low-key weapons that are still pretty good in the sandbox compared to their higher, more better-rated meta counterparts. One of the weapons that I talk about in the write-up is Hero's Burden right here. This is what I'm going to be showing in the background. I do my best to get some good clips of its range. This is a very high range roll on a Hero's Burden. It's got Zen Moment, Kill Clip, armor piercing rounds, a really good sight, a range masterwork, and then and then I'm using a counterbalance stock. It's a really good roll on it. It has quite a bit more range than Recluse does. And I tried to show off how much more range it has. The sight does increase its zoom factor, but it's also a 900 adaptive instead of a 900 lightweight like its counterpart, the Recluse. Now, one of the big talks, or not necessarily one of the big talks, but one of the main weapons that you see a lot in the Crucible is the Recluse. You hear about it a lot. It's a very powerful weapon. The combination of ricochet rounds on a lightweight SMG with a perk that gives it essentially double damage, the Master of Arms perk, and then also having the ability to activate the Master of Arms perk based on any weapon kill makes it a very potent slaying weapon. And then you tack onto the fact that it's not damage capped in PvE activities. A active Recluse will out DPS this Hero's Burden, because an active Recluse will hit for 25 to the body. It has a damage cap in PvP of 25, regardless of the head or body or whatever it's hitting. And the Master of Arms perk is a more powerful perk than Zen Moment is. Or than, not Zen Moment, obviously it's more powerful than Zen Moment, but it's more powerful than Kill Clip. Now, in the background I'm showing that I don't have any unflinching perks on, because I keep getting flinched pretty bad with this SMG, and the kit that I'm using in the background for my armor isn't really designed to take on with an SMG. I'm still using traction and a high sensitivity and stuff like that. If I wanted to excel a little bit more with an SMG, I'd probably switch to a different subclass and take off Blink, and then use something with a tracing type of jump, or use like a Hunter, turn my sensitivity down to like 7 or 6, and then maybe take off traction, because that tends to make SMGs a little bit easier to handle. And I do mention that a little bit in the write-up, that I talk about that kind of strategy of tuning your sensitivities to the weapons that you're using, and the other perks that you're using as well. But one of the things that I really wanted to make this video about, to coincide with the write-up, is there has been some talk, or at least some mumblings and rumbles in a couple of communities about whether or not Recluse is going to be on the nerfing table or on the table for the nerfs. And it's already been removed from scrimmages along with a lot of the other pinnacle weapons. And in their own right, yeah, I can understand why they would do that, because they are pretty powerful weapons and there's no incentive to really use anything else, and that limits the diversity of the sandbox, and that limits the agency and kind of diversity and feel of a sandbox when everybody's just using the same thing all the time. It does feel kind of bland, a little stale, and a little uninteresting, I think is the best thing. So I'm one of those kind of players that likes to find a good roll on anything, if it's just an interesting roll. You know, like, it doesn't have to be a god tier perk or god tier perks on a gun. If I just find a gun that's like, oh, that looks cool, I'll go and play with it, and I'll see if I like it, and if I don't. I've found some guns that I really don't like doing that, but I've also found some guns that I really like doing that. And this Hero's Burden is definitely one of them. The thing that I like about this is that it does outrange a Recluse by quite a bit, even when the Recluse's perk is active, the Master of Arms perk. When that's active, it is definitely going to outrange it, and that does make this SMG a little bit more of a contender in that right. And since it has AP rounds, I can over-penetrate targets and all that kind of stuff and get double kills in a similar fashion to the way the Recluse can. That was a nice mountaintop shot, or Malicious Birthright shot. Anyways, so do I think Recluse is going to need a nerf? Now, I'm not the best player in the world, so I can't tell you what the rest of the community is going to feel, or what the higher-ups in the PvP community will feel about Recluse getting a nerf. What I can tell you from my experience of having Recluse and earning all of the pinnacle weapons solo in the season that they've been released, except for Mountaintop, I did that the season later, is that the pinnacle weapons are very good. They take a lot of work to get. And when they're nerfed, it feels bad. I was in favor of the Luna's Howl Not Forgotten nerf, mainly because it was just killing the entire sandbox. There wasn't a lot of stuff that could compete with it, basically because of its heavy prevalence on controller, which is, I play on console, so it was a really prevalent gun. And nobody really changed what they were using because it was so good. I think Luna's Howl is really good now, but at the same time, I also feel like the gun didn't need to be nerfed. It was just overused to the point where they had to nerf it. You know what I mean? Like, the gun was really good. There's some contenders for it. There were some contending weapons and weapon archetypes and all that kind of stuff that could fight Not Forgotten and Luna's Howl, but I think they also at the same time were very strong, to the point where they were pretty much borderline uncontestable in a lot of circumstances, and that did make the sandbox a little unfun. Recluse, I don't see really doing that. That was a terrible shotgun shot, by the way. The Recluse I don't really see being as limiting to the rest of the sandbox. Yeah, when you run into a lobby and everybody's got Mountaintop and Recluse on, it feels like doo-doo. And I will say that since I play on console, those kind of Recluse woes aren't really as extreme because M&K and controller behave differently when it comes to SMGs. The SMGs are much more difficult to control on a controller than they are on a mouse and keyboard because of the recoil pattern and field of view and all that kind of stuff. But one of the main things that a lot of people kind of latch onto when they look at the Recluse is that it shreds you really fast when you're in its range and when it's got its perk active, and you can pair it with things like the Mountaintop and just have it active all the time. I got 5,001 Iron Banner heavy burden kills with Mountaintop and Recluse and a Liar's Handshake. Because that combo is really powerful. You just one-shot somebody, even with heavy burden on, with a Mountaintop, and then you burn down a couple more with the Recluse until someone kills you. There's really very few weaknesses with that playstyle. And I think that that's one of the things that people kind of latch onto is, oh wow, this is a really dominant weapon because you can just activate it really easily and all that kind of stuff. But Recluse outside of PvP, kind of, like, outside of its activated perk, kind of is just another SMG, right? Like, I've fought a lot of Recluses with this Hero's Burden, and this Hero's Burden puts up a similar fight to Recluse, I feel. I think a lot of SMGs feel fairly similar when it comes to their performance at a base level. And if you have a really good roll on an SMG, you can actually put up a pretty good fight against a lot of the pinnacle weapons anyways. So I'm not sure if in PvP, Recluse really needs a nerf. And I also like the fact that it's one of those weapons that has synergy with getting kills with your other weapons, because that's a type of playstyle that I really like to do, like getting crit picks with a sniper and then quick swapping over and cleaning somebody up. It's a really active playstyle. And the problem that I have with nerfing pinnacle weapons is that they're kind of designed to be really good anyways, you know? And when we get rid of pinnacle weapons being good, we also put more emphasis on random rolls. And then the complaint becomes, well, I can't get a good roll because, you know, I can't do this activity, blah, 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 blah. Like this Hero's Burden, right? You can't get a good roll on Hero's Burden because nobody wants to play Iron Banner or whatever, right? And then it becomes this huge complaint about Iron Banner matchmaking and laggy lobbies and unbroken pub stops and all that kind of stuff. But if you have the Recluse, which is easily obtainable through a long investment term quest or something like that, that rewards, you know, people that are using SMGs and things, then I kind of don't see the argument for getting it nerfed. I think the main argument for people wanting a nerf on SMGs is coming in the form of PvE and other weapons not feeling as good as Recluse, and Recluse being extremely dominant in PvE. And to that, I kind of get it, but at that point you're kind of also subject to your own choice, right? Because I've done a couple of different things in PvE that over the last couple of months that are really not as meta, but equally as efficient, right? Like, instead of using Mountaintop, I'll use Izanagi's Burden and a Recluse or something like that. Or just mix it up entirely. Sometimes I'll just use Lumina and an Orwing's Maul with spike grenades on my Swarm of the Raven. That's another really cool PvE loadout that I really like. Has nothing to do with any of the pinnacle weapons whatsoever, and it's got a really high DPS threshold, especially when you pair it with a Celestial Nighthawk. It's really sweet. And while that does involve some of the meta weapons, grenade launchers and all that kind of stuff, and while I'm not against having weapons have their damage brought in line, I'm not entirely sure Recluse or any of the other pinnacle weapons really need to have a nerf in their damage. But I wouldn't be against it. Like, I'm kind of on the fence about it, and I know I sound kind of flip-floppy when I'm talking about it right now, but I don't know if nerfing Recluse or if nerfing grenade launchers is really the solution, right? Especially if some of those weapons do require a reasonable amount of grind, but they're also really accessible to the large majority of the player base. A lot of the quests, if I'm honest, have been made a lot easier for the general majority of the population to get. Recluse was very straightforward to get. Revoker was extremely easy to get. And then on top of that, the Mountaintop is going to be made more accommodating for the general player base, and I think that that's a very good step in the right direction. I think quests could definitely benefit from going into a more investment-heavy style acquisition process instead of focusing more on the glory, but I'm holding off that kind of opinion until Shadowkeep releases and we see the updated PvP system, because it might function a little bit better and a little differently. Because comp is actually performing a lot better than it was when it released in Season 3, especially from matchmaking parameters. But do SMGs and grenade launchers and the top tier spitters for PvE and PvP need a nerf right now? I don't know, man, because I've got this Mida mini tool with Surrounded and Eye of the Storm, and it puts up almost as much damage, like a very measurably close amount of damage to Teraba when it has Ravenous Beast active. Teraba with Ravenous Beast active dump trucks all over the Recluse when the Recluse has Master of Arms. Teraba with the Ravenous Beast perk is ridiculous in PvE, right? And this Mida mini tool that you can easily farm from the Menagerie is really close to being as good as that Ravenous Beast exotic mass. You know, it's just almost as good as that. Like, it probably has a very minorly smaller or minorly longer TTK than the Teraba, and it's not by much, and that's because it's got Surrounded with a Surrounded mod. So once that's active, it's getting a 50% damage buff, and it's already shooting at the same RPM as Teraba when it gets that Ravenous Beast perk, and Teraba gets a in and around 40% damage buff on top of that, but it has a higher impact value, so it deals a little bit more damage in PvE, I believe. I could be wrong about that, but I believe it just does a little bit more damage. The reason why Teraba actually out DPS's my Mida mini tool is because its reload is much faster. But if you have a rally barricade, then the Mida mini actually keeps up with it. So I don't know if nerfing the Recluse is really the solution, because SMGs in general, they just do a lot of damage really quickly if you have the right perks on them. And they have a lot of ammunition, and the main thing is that they just shoot really fast. So if you're hitting crits and you have the right perk combinations on them, and you're not having to reload, and you've got good synergy with your exotics and good synergy with your build, you're going to be really strong anyways. So I don't think nerfing Recluse is really the right step, but I would understand if they wanted to bring that more in line to let other weapons shine, if that makes sense.